Good afternoon, class. How are we today? Good. Now, who knows what happened on 9/11? Raise your hand. Okay. What happened? Do you know?
Two terrorists attacked the Twin Towers.
Okay, that's pretty good. Now, right now I teach at ALA right across the grass over there. I teach history for the 7th and 8th grades. But before I was a member of the ALA family, I used to do that. So that's what I looked like a long time ago. Now, who knows what year this is?
2019.
Okay. And how many years is that between now and when this happened in 2001? Raise your hand.
18 years.
Okay. Yeah. So 18 years ago, this was me, and I lived in New York City. And in order to talk about what happened to me at September 11th, I have to talk about the first bombing of the World Trade Center. Do we know the difference between primary and secondary sources? Okay. So we all know the difference? I am a primary source for what happened on September 11, 2001 in New York City. I was there, and I'm going to talk about that quickly. Now, how about for what happened in Washington, which is actually Virginia, what happened to the Pentagon? Am I a primary source there, or am I a secondary source if I talk about that? Tough question.
Secondary.
I'm a secondary source because I was not there. So, when this happened in 1993, which is years before 2001, I went into work and I was what's like a regular detective then. If someone got robbed, I investigated things of that nature. And I went into work and I was happy because I knew I was going to catch somebody that day. So I was getting ready to go out and I knew where the bad guy was and I was going to make an arrest. And the phone rang. And it was from headquarters. And they told me I need to respond down to the World Trade Center. And I asked them why, because there had been an explosion, but they said it was a gas explosion over the air. And they said in the computer, they had me down as being an expert on terrorism. I started laughing. What had happened is I volunteered to go on a one-day class on my own time about terrorism, and they put me in the computer as an expert. So I ended up having to go down here. I never caught that one bad guy that I wanted to catch. And I went down to the first bombing. And that's what the first bombing looked like. This is the World Trade Center right here. There's a garage below and a bomb went off below it. This is what it looked like when you got inside. And I remember when I walked down to around this area, what amazed me was the hole was so big I couldn't even throw a baseball across it. And that's what amazed me. I said, this could not have been from just a car bomb. It had to be something much larger. So I worked on this investigation. And at the time, I didn't even live in New York City. But I found out what a great neighborhood it was to live in. So then I ended up living here. That's my house right there. And I have my little dog in the window right there somewhere, but you can't see him. Here are the World Trade Centers, the Twin Towers. There's some other buildings over here that are important as well. And I thought it was a great neighborhood. Then on September 11th, I wasn't in the building when that happened. I was over here somewhere. I was up further north. Osama bin Laden was the mastermind of this terrorist plot. And that's what the first plane looked like. They hijacked 4 planes, and they were using them as guided missiles. The bad guys took them over. They knew how to fly somewhat, and they flew the planes into what targets they had. Now, because I wasn't at home, I turned around, and all I saw was this from a distance away. So it didn't look as bad as it looks here. You know exactly what's happening. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew something had took place. So I decided to go and respond and run on down there. And I got to this position right here. As a matter of fact, this gentleman sitting on the corner, that's Burger King. There's a Burger King right here. I was turning the corner right here, and that's Flight 175 coming in to crash into the South Tower. So now these were some more bad terrorists, took over another plane, and they decided they were going to crash it into the South Tower. So had I gotten there any sooner, I would have gone inside here, and it probably saved my life that I only made it this far. Because some people did get hurt That's the debris field from the explosion. Some people got hit with this kind of stuff, so I stayed outside to help them. I didn't go inside the building and all the way up. That's another picture of it that just shows you how big the smoke was. What runs an airplane? What does an airplane run on? Yeah, say that again, loud and proud.
Gas.
Gasoline, lots of it. So when they crash, they can cause a big amount of fire, and that's what took place here. Unfortunately, the building fell down. It came crashing down. Now, remember I told you I was part of that first investigation in 1993? Well, I had talked to engineers. Those are people that build buildings, like architects, and they promised me that this building was designed to withstand a plane crash. So I never thought it was going to come down. Now, I'm a history teacher, so I know a lot of history. I remembered that a plane crashed into the Empire State Building. Does anyone know what that looks like, the Empire State Building? Have you seen pictures of it? And basically nothing happened. There was a tiny fire. The building didn't fall down. So I knew that, plus I knew the engineers were telling me that this wouldn't happen, so I believed them. So I kept running in and out and trying to help people, thinking that the building wasn't going to come down. When it did start to fall, I was probably from here, just beyond that fence, maybe 20 feet beyond that fence, and it made a sound. Like something, if you ever see those Titanic movies, the bending of steel, it made a sound, it slightly leaned forward, and then you started to see it come down. It started popping, and it started to make this popping sound. Now, when you're on the ground and you look up at a building that's 110 stories high, it's like way, way up here, and it looks really small. So at first, when we all looked up, we weren't sure the whole building was coming down. We thought maybe just a little piece. And then someone yelled out, "It's falling," and everybody started to run. And I ran as fast as I could. And I ended up hurting my foot. I ended up stepping on part of the airplane from flight 175. And then I started hopping as fast as I could to keep going. So the building came down. I lived through that part. This huge amount of black dust, it's gray and it's black, just swept over the neighborhood, and you could no longer see the sun. It was just as sunny as it is today there. And for what seemed like forever, I was just pitched into absolute blackness. I wasn't sure if I was alive, because I couldn't see anything. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel the pain in my foot for a few more hours until I started coughing. I took in a lot of that debris that was in the air, so I just started coughing it out. I then heard a woman that was crying for help nearby, so I knew I was still alive, and I hopped on over and I went to help her, and she had broken her leg, so I gave her a hand. And then the rest of the day, we managed to make it into a restaurant, and the rest of the day, unfortunately, the other tower comes down too. So now 2 big buildings have fallen down. And remember I showed you a picture of my house? It was right next door. Unfortunately, when it fell down, it blew in all my windows to my house, and it took all that debris and sent it in. So a little bit later on, I tried to go back to see if I could help, and when I got back to the area, everything was on fire. So I really couldn't help much. So I then went back to my house, and my door, you see how the door is straight up and down, horizontal? My door was now sideways like this. And I had to push in the door. And I pushed in the door, and I had a little dog there all by himself, this little guy here, Jake, which is where the book comes from. And I thought he was gone, because I called his name and I didn't hear anything. And then finally, in the back room, I heard some scruffling around, and he came running out, and he was completely gray. He was covered in that ash. And normally he's kind of a red-looking dog, so he came out. So then I got the dog, I went out. I went to my job because my house, I couldn't stay there anymore. I made some phone calls to try to find where my daughter was. I had a 9-year-old daughter, and she was at school, but I knew school evacuated, so I had to reach out for her. Now, one of the great things about this nation, and we have a lot of them, is that we're a wealthy nation. So because my house was destroyed, they gave me another house temporarily while they fixed it. So I went up there, I got my daughter out of school later on, and we went to the new house, But she was, how old are you now? How old?
11.
Okay, you're older than she was then. She was only 9. But all her toys got contaminated by that dust, and they had to be thrown out. So she wanted to know, why are we in a new house? Why did these bad people do this? Why was all her stuff thrown out? So to actually occupy her mind and kind of cheer her up a little bit, I told her, why don't we write a book about Jake the dog? And she thought that was a great idea. So we wrote this book, and I'm leaving copies of it here. And this book isn't exactly about what happened on September 11th. It's about a dog that overcomes a handicap. He loses his ability to smell. And do you have any questions about 9/11? I can even talk a little bit about the investigation if you like, or what happened that day, or about Jake the Bomb Dog, or writing this with my 9-year-old daughter. I have time for a couple.
What went through your mind when you heard about the World Trade Center?
When it started coming down, run. The first thing, as a matter of fact, it was, I believe, the only time in my life where my physical body outran my brain. Because when it really started to come down, the wind started pushing out of the bottom and really made me run fast. And I had an idea I was going to run down into the subway. A subway is a train that runs underground. And I figured I'd get underground, it's under at least 10 feet of earth. I would be okay. And by the time I actually made that decision, I had run by the subway station by about 30 feet. So my physical being, my legs outran my brain. And it's a good thing, because running down into that subway station would have been very, very bad. It ends up collapsing. So the fact that I outran my thoughts probably worked out better for me. I didn't have any time to think about it, like really think about it, until much later. The other thing is, I didn't know the whole world was watching it live. I didn't think about that at the time. And people at home, even here in Arizona, had somewhat of a better idea what was going on, because when you were on the ground and you looked up, it didn't look that bad. You saw the fire and you thought, well, the top few floors are going to be ruined, but you didn't think the whole thing was going to come down. Anybody else? 2 more maybe?
What kind of a dog is Jake?
He's a dachshund. He's a little hot dog. He was a great dog, and he lived a long life, happy. He's good.
What were you most scared about when you were running away from the debris?
I didn't get scared till later in the day, after both towers came down, and I had a moment to start thinking. I got scared because we were really worried about what else did they have planned that was bad. The United States is what's called a superpower. It means we have a lot of military. We're very large. We have a lot of ships. And if you're going to do something to us and all you're going to do is knock down a couple of buildings, we're going to come after you. So I thought they must have had something much, as bad as that was, I thought they might have had something much worse planned. And we were worried about that. One more.
Oh, I forgot.
One more. Anyone who remembers? Thank you.
Did your daughter ever talk? Did your daughter's teacher ever talk about it in school?
My daughter's teacher did later on in the year, and I felt bad because 2 things happened. We had never had a lockdown. If you had told me a school had a lockdown, I wouldn't know what you were talking about. After September 11th, they had a teacher had to do lockdowns in school. And when I was a kid, we were worried that we were going to have a war with another big country. So they used to make us hide underneath our desks during like fire drills, certain kind of drills. And that bothered me that they had to have a lockdown, because it reminded me of how I grew up. So the teacher did tell her about September 11th. Then they taught them all how to do lockdowns. They never did it before that. Thank you so much. It was so wonderful talking with you.